$865 billion gone in a single afternoon. You are watching the most vital alliance on Earth collapse in real time, and Washington is in absolute panic mode. Donald Trump slammed an ultimatum on the desk, fully expecting Ottawa to bow. He thought he held all the leverage. He thought he could bully America's quiet northern neighbor into total submission. But Mark Carney didn't just say no. He took a wrecking ball to America's future energy supply and walked out the door. Trump's bluff just backfired on a historic scale. The deal is dead. The American power grid is suddenly exposed, and the fallout is heading straight for your driveway. In the next few minutes, I'm going to show you the exact moment Trump lost control, how Carney flipped the board, and why you are about to pay the price at the pump. Here is what you need to understand. This week in February 2026, the Trump administration pushed a massive, aggressive demand onto Canada's desk. It was called the Forge Initiative. It stands for the Forum on Resource Geostrategic Engagement. It sounds boring, but it is actually a weapon. Trump wanted Canada to lock its vast reserves of critical minerals, raw energy, and crude oil exclusively into the U.S. supply chain. No outside buyers, no independent deals, complete compliance. He wanted Canada to act like a giant compliant warehouse for the American industrial machine. If Canada refused, Trump threatened a devastating blanket 100% tariff on everything crossing the northern border. He basically told Canada, give us total control of your resources or we will destroy your economy. It was a classic Trump pressure campaign. Threaten maximum pain, demand total surrender, wait for the other guy to crack. But Mark Carney did not crack. The Canadian Prime Minister looked at the ultimatum, he looked at the threats, and he said no. Carney didn't just reject the deal, he actively killed the negotiations. He pulled Canadian diplomats out of the room. He let the $865 billion integrated energy framework completely collapse. And then he got on the phone with Europe. He got on the phone with Asia. Carney told the world that Canadian energy is open for business, but not to bullies. This is shocking. It is a total rewrite of North American history. Canada is the largest foreign supplier of energy to the United States. Period. You rely on Canadian oil to run your car. You rely on Canadian natural gas to heat your home. You rely on Canadian electricity to keep the lights on in border states. And Trump just gambled all of it on a bluff that Canada just aggressively called. You might be thinking this is just political theater, just words. It is not. The shift is real and the money is already moving. Let's look at the receipts. Receipt 1, the Supreme Court smackdown. Just days ago, the U.S. Supreme Court handed Trump a massive legal defeat. They struck down his use of emergency powers to slap tariffs on Canada and Mexico. The highest court in the land said his tactics were illegal. Trump was furious. He immediately scrambled to invoke a dusty old law from 1974, Section 122, to force a 15% global tariff anyway. But the damage to his leverage was already done. Carney saw the weakness. He saw that Trump's legal threats were hollow. He knew the U.S. court system wasn't backing the White House. That gave Canada the exact opening they needed to reject the energy ultimatum. Washington was divided. Ottawa was united. Receipt 2, the Buy Canadian pivot. While Trump was ranting on social media about tariffs, Carney was actually rewriting his domestic economy. Canada just officially launched the Buy Canadian policy. It is a massive, multi-billion-dollar pivot away from U.S. reliance. They are keeping their steel. They are keeping their lumber. They are funding their own local supply chains. They are effectively building a firewall against the American market. Reports say Canadian infrastructure projects are already rewriting their vendor lists. U.S. contractors are getting locked out. Billions in contracts are suddenly off limits to American companies. Receipt 3, the China EV deal. This is the one that really made Washington panic. Trump has been demanding the world cut ties with China. He demands absolute loyalty. But what did Carney do? He quietly flew out his top trade envoys. He cut a deal. Canada lowered tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles, and in exchange, China dropped tariffs on Canadian agriculture. Carney bypassed the United States entirely. He found a new buyer for Canadian goods. Cargo ships that used to dock in Seattle or Los Angeles are now being courted by the port of Vancouver. Trump tried to isolate Canada. Instead, Canada isolated Trump. Receipt 4, the Davos warning. A few weeks ago, at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Mark Carney stood on stage and delivered a line that sent chills through the financial world. He didn't yell, he didn't rant, he just calmly stated, middle powers must act together because if you are not at the table, you are on the menu. He was talking directly about Donald Trump, and he was telling the rest of the world to form a wall against American aggression. He was signaling to Germany, to France, to Japan. The message was clear. America is no longer a reliable partner. We need to build our own network. Receipt 5, the market reaction. The moment the energy deal collapsed, look at what happened to the screens. Energy futures spiked. U.S. auto manufacturers sounded the alarm. The Canadian dollar stabilized, but U.S. consumer confidence took a hit. Investors realize that if Canada actually stops giving the U.S. preferential treatment on crude oil and critical minerals, the American industrial machine slows down. The cameras caught Trump storming out of a briefing room when the news broke. The cameras caught Carney, cool and collected, shaking hands with European trade delegates. The contrast is staggering, and the numbers do not lie. Wall Street knows who is actually in control of the resources right now, and it is not the guy sitting in the Oval Office. So why is this happening now? Why is the U.S. losing its grip on a country it used to dominate without breaking a sweat? Because Donald Trump is trapped by his own tactics. Trump only knows one way to negotiate. He escalates, he threatens, he makes demands that are so extreme he assumes the other side will beg for mercy. He treats international allies like rival real estate developers. He thinks he can just bankrupt them with legal fees and mean tweets. But countries are not buildings. You cannot just foreclose on a sovereign nation, especially not a nation that controls the natural resources you need to survive. Look at his behavior leading up to this collapse. Trump spent months mocking Canada. He kept joking about making Canada the 51st state. He publicly floated the idea of buying Greenland and treating the Arctic like his own personal playground. He thought he was being dominant, but he was actually just being impulsive. And that impulsiveness has a massive cost. He threatened tariffs. So Canadian companies paused their investments in the U.S. supply chains, got nervous. Look at the Ambassador Bridge connecting Detroit and Windsor. 25% of all merchandise trade between the U.S. and Canada crosses that single bridge. When Trump threatens to shut down trade, the trucking companies panic. The auto plants in Michigan panic. They cannot build cars without Canadian parts. Prices on raw materials rose, and American voters started feeling the pinch at the checkout counter. Trump wanted leverage, but his leverage backfired. By constantly threatening his closest neighbor, he forced them to find a way to survive without him. When you threaten a man's house every single day, eventually he stops inviting you inside. He builds a taller fence. He buys a bigger lock. That is exactly what Canada did. Trump is losing control of the narrative because his threats are no longer working. He tried to bully a country that supplies a massive chunk of the U.S. economy. When the Supreme Court struck down his emergency tariffs, he looked weak. When Canada ignored his Forge ultimatum, he looked irrelevant. He demands obedience. But the world is simply stepping back. They are watching him flail. Sources claim the West Wing is in total chaos over this. Trump is demanding his advisors find a way to punish Canada, but every option they present him just hurts American consumers more. If he taxes Canadian wood, American houses get more expensive to build. If he taxes Canadian aluminum, American beer cans cost more. If he taxes Canadian oil, gas prices explode. He has surrounded himself with advisors who tell him he is always right. But the market is telling him he is wrong. You cannot run a global economy on rage. Now look at Mark Carney, Mark Carney doesn't fight like Trump fights. Trump throws punches in the dark. Carney plays chess in the light. Carney is a former central banker. He ran the Bank of Canada. He ran the Bank of England. He understands global markets better than almost anyone on the planet. He knows that power is not about who screams the loudest on television. Power is about who controls the systems. When Trump issued the energy ultimatum, Carney didn't log on to social media to insult him. He didn't hold a screaming press conference. Carney used systems. He used alliances. He used the cold, hard math of the global market. Carney understands that Canada has something the world desperately needs: critical minerals for batteries, fresh water, massive agricultural output, and enormous energy reserves. He took Trump's pressure and he turned it into Canadian leverage. He is framing this entire conflict around one word: sovereignty. Carney is telling his people that Canada will not be bullied. He is telling the world that Canada is a stable, reliable partner. Investors crave stability. Markets hate chaos. Trump brings chaos. Carney brings stability. By walking away from the $865 billion deal, Carney sent a very clear message. He proved that Canada can survive the pain of a trade war better than the United States can survive the loss of its energy supply. He is playing the long game. Carney is building a coalition of middle powers. He is working with Europe. He is working with Asia. He is building a global fence around the Trump administration. He has total credibility with the markets. When Carney says he will redirect trade, the markets believe him. The bond yields shift. The currency markets adjust. When Trump says he will impose a tariff, the Supreme Court strikes it down, and Wall Street rolls its eyes. The difference in competence is blinding. Carney isn't just reacting to the news cycle. He is actively rewriting the rules of North American trade. He is slowly, methodically detaching Canada from the erratic swings of American politics. And Washington has absolutely no idea how to stop him. You need to understand what this means for you. Even if you don't care about Canada, Canada touches your life every single day. History is shifting right now, and it is shifting inside your home. Let's talk about prices. If Canada actually redirects its critical minerals away from the United States, the American auto industry hits a brick wall. You want an electric vehicle? You want a hybrid? You want advanced electronics? The parts rely on Canadian mining: cobalt, lithium, nickel. If Trump's tariffs and Carney's blockades take hold, the price of a car is going to skyrocket. Supply drops, demand stays the same, prices explode. That is simple math. Let's talk about gas and heating. Canada supplies over half of the crude oil imported by the United States. They supply a massive amount of natural gas to the Midwest and the Northeast. Look at the refineries in Texas and Louisiana. They rely on heavy crude piped all the way down from Alberta. If that supply chain is disrupted because an $865 billion energy framework just collapsed, your heating bill is going up. Your gas prices are going up. You will feel this every single time you pull up to the pump. Let's talk about the grocery store. Trade wars are not fought by politicians. They are paid for by citizens. A tariff is just a tax on you. When Trump slaps a tariff on Canadian goods, the Canadian company doesn't pay it. The American importer pays it. And then they pass that cost directly to you. Your bread, your meat, your produce, it all relies on cross-border logistics. But this is about more than just money out of your wallet. This is about global trust. For the last century, the United States was the undisputed leader of the free world. If you had a problem, you called Washington. Washington set the rules. Carney's move signals something terrifying for American power. It signals that America's closest ally no longer trusts American leadership. If Canada, the polite, quiet neighbor to the north, is willing to stand up, walk away from the table, and sever a massive energy deal, what do you think the rest of the world is going to do? Carney didn't raise his voice. He raised the cost of ignoring Canada. He proved that the United States is no longer the only game in town. So where does this go from here? This July, the United States, Mexico, and Canada are scheduled to review their massive free trade agreement, the USMCA, or as Canada calls it, CUSMA. This was supposed to be a routine check-in, a simple signature. Now it is going to be a bloodbath. There are three ways this plays out. Scenario A, the freeze out. This is the most likely. Carney keeps stalling. He refuses to sign any new energy deals with the U.S. He continues to sign minor strategic deals with Europe and Asia. He lets Trump scream and shout, knowing that Trump is politically wounded by the Supreme Court and his own internal chaos. The U.S. economy slows down. Inflation creeps up as raw materials get harder to find. American businesses beg the White House to drop the tough act. And Trump takes the blame going into the midterms. Canada wins by simply standing still. Scenario B, the escalation. Trump refuses to lose. He ignores the courts. He uses dubious national security loopholes to shut down the border entirely. He blocks Canadian trucks. He tries to freeze Canadian assets. Carney responds by literally shutting off the pipelines that feed U.S. refineries. He cuts the power lines that feed the northern states. If this happens, it is a full-blown economic depression for border states. Factories shut down, store shelves go empty, prices double overnight. It is absolute chaos. It is mutual assured economic destruction. Scenario C, the sudden cave. Trump looks at the internal polling. He sees that his base is furious about gas prices. He realizes he cannot win a war of attrition against his own energy supplier. He quietly drops the Forge ultimatum. He claims a massive victory on social media, pretending he got what he wanted. But behind closed doors, his team begs Carney to come back to the table and restore the oil flows. This is the part where leaders usually calm it down. They pick up the phone. They find a compromise to save face. But Trump doesn't do calm, and Carney doesn't do favors. The uncertainty you are feeling right now, it is real, and it is dangerous. The old rules are gone. The greatest trick Donald Trump ever played was convincing his base that he held all the cards. Mark Carney just flipped the table and showed the world that Trump's hand was completely empty. The massive energy deal is dead, the global market is shaking, and the U.S. is suddenly entirely alone on the world stage. Do you think Carney is protecting Canada? Or is he daring Trump to overreact and destroy his own economy? Drop your take below. And subscribe if you want the next update on this crisis before the mainstream headlines catch up. We are tracking this every single day, and you are not going to want to miss the next move.